the Psalms aren't only talking to people, but they're talking to themselves. And what I mean by that, I'm reading this book right now, which goes really well with the particular Psalms that we're working through, called Spiritual Depression by a guy named Martin Lloyd-Jones. He was a preacher throughout the 40s and 50s and 60s in Britain. And he was actually a doctor, a medical doctor. And during the war, so many preachers had to go off to war that he actually took over a pulpit and he began preaching. And he became what some people say when church history is looked back on, that Martin Lloyd-Jones will be one of the greatest preachers of all time, not only in the last 100 years, but of all time preachers, because he took what he knew about the medical world, the practicality of real life, and he brought it into the scriptures and he let it live in people's lives. And he wrote a book that some people have called one of the best books in the English language, called Spiritual Depression. And it starts out talking about the Psalms. And he actually says this, I love this, because this idea of talking to yourself first. He says, we must talk to ourselves rather than allowing ourselves to talk to us. Now, notice the difference. We must talk to ourselves rather than allowing ourselves to talk to us. He says this, have you realized that most of your unhappiness in life is due to the fact that you're listening to yourself instead of talking to yourself? Right? That literally when you wake up in the morning, you're starting to listen to all the nonsense from yesterday. You're starting to listen to the garbage. You're starting to listen to the problems, the stresses, the things that you didn't like about so-and-so. All of the things from yesterday start talking to you rather than you actually talking to yourself. And so he says we need to say to ourselves, listen for a moment, self, I will speak to you. And then he says the main art in spiritual living is to know how to handle yourself. You have to take yourself in hand. You have to address yourself, preach to yourself. Over what? Over someone else actually controlling you. Over circumstances controlling you. You've got to preach to yourself. You have to say, self, here's the reality of the gospel. I am beloved because Jesus died for me. I am this, I am that. I have to forgive. All of this is you talking to yourself versus letting yourself talk to you. Understand that distinction, because that's the difference between a flourishing spiritual life and one that's deadly.